What if I told you the God's Limit has completely flipped the script on what we thought we knew about Khaenri'ah? Welcome back to Genshin Lore with Amabi. We've been doing Genshin Lore since before the Archon War, and let's dive right in. Before you watch this video, you should be aware of the most recent Archon quest, A Space and Time for You, and also have watched the God's Limit teaser trailer. This will be covering events through those times, so if you haven't completed those, feel free to click away at this point. The God's Limit teaser trailer actually unveils the 4 shades, 5 if you think Rhineland and Nibirius are 2 different people, which they still seem to be even though they have fused into one form. And what we have discovered is that Asmoday may not have been the one who destroyed Khaenri'ah at all. She may have just been there. The Curse of Immortality was laid by Ronova, which we knew from the Rhineland Archon quest. And we also knew, because what the Lord of the Night told us, that Ronova got in trouble for that. She was not supposed to place that Curse of Immortality at the Cataclysm, and the Lord of the Night says that it was seen as overstepping her bounds as a shade. But Asmoday is the one who stopped the golden-haired twins from leaving. And it's really interesting because the 7 individuals that are gathered around the woman who is telling the story are listening to the story of the 4 shades and how Asmoday, the ruler of space, tore the golden-haired twins apart and did not allow them to leave this world. And if you remember the opening cutscene, what Asmoday tells them is that the abrogation of mankind stops here. And that's a really interesting phrase because abrogation kind of means not just to break a law, but repeal it or abolish it, a law, a right, or an agreement. And it's kind of something that is very late in the foundational work of Genshin Impact, that Teyvat has its own laws. So the golden-haired twins, in their leaving, were trying to break or repeal some of the laws of Teyvat, and perhaps that is a law that space is supposed to reign over, that you are not allowed to leave Teyvat once you enter it. And it's really interesting because if you remember in Parent Harry, what the child had to admit to be allowed into Khaenri'ah was that they were dead. They were not allowed in until they said that they were dead, and they also described seeing a giant eye in the sky, which we know was probably Ronova at this point. And we have Skirk now, but she kind of gets around this by getting an exception because of Certology's power. So just think of her as an outlier, but it seems to be a rule that those who enter Teyvat cannot leave its borders, cannot go beyond the firmament. And Asmoday stops them. But why? Because Asmoday seems like she is there to enforce that law, the twins leaving, not the law of whatever the Khaenri'ahs have done, even though her cubes are kind of seen all over the space. In the most recent Archon quest, A Space and Time for You, we see Asmoday is there. There's like a ripple that happens when the twins are talking, and we can see that she is in the background. And so that places her at Khaenri'ah at the time of the fall. And this seems to be before the Curse of Immortality was placed by Ronova, but also before the Curse of the Wilderness was placed, because Diarith is still human. Now, why would Asmoday, if she was trying to stop the travelers from leaving, go there and reunite the travelers in a space-time that is overlapped? Why would she do that? Maybe we've gotten it all wrong. Maybe Asmoday is actually trying to help us within the bounds of the laws that she works under. We can't leave because that would break her law, and it would, I don't really understand what the laws and why they can't be broken, but we do have an example of what does happen when a shade oversteps their bounds and tries to play at what I assume the role of the heavenly principles is, and that Ronova changes the laws herself without authorization, and in less than 500 years, that is used against her, and she loses an argument with Capitano and has to allow him to reconnect the Khaenri'ah souls to the ley lines of Natland. She can't stop it because of how she has manipulated those laws, and a paradox cannot be created. But in a space and time for you, a paradox seems to have just been created, because if you think about it, when the traveler meets Deidre, she already has one of her keys. That key is supposedly the key that the traveler gave to her, that she brings back 500 years in the past and shows the Abyss Twin, which makes them leave Khaenri'ah when it is falling to go look for us. But at that point, there would have been 3 keys. There would have been the key that the Abyss Twin had, the key that we had in our hyperbolic chamber, and the key that Deidre had. That's a paradox, and Ronova herself admits that we cannot have paradoxes. So it kind of implies that what Asmoday is doing with the keys, even if 3 are in one space, did not create a paradox that would upset the laws of Teyvat. But if Asmoday is trying to help us, if she is trying to make sure we can be reunited and we are working towards the right things, what does that mean in the end? Who really destroyed Khaenri'ah and why? And I need to point out the heavenly principles is nowhere in all of this. And this is going to be a lot of theory jumping right here really quickly, so just hang on with me. Phanes is supposedly the name of the primordial god of creation in Teyvat. That name comes from the Greek, which means bring to light, and that is related to the Latin word we all know, Lucifer, which means light bringer. So in Genshin, Phanes, the primordial god, is believed to be the one responsible for vanquishing the 7 dragon lords that used to rule Teyvat and engaged in the creation of heaven and earth. And Phanes is the one who is kind of, well, the primordial one is most likely the person who is the heavenly principles. And we actually have a character who has a name from the Ars Gotia, but who is not an Archon and who is not Phanes. And who is that? That is Paimon. And I want to take a moment to note that a lot of people talk about Hytham and Kaveh and their inverted color palettes, but Dainsleif and Paimon have inverted color palettes, and those are rather distinct, that pink and that dark blue, and it seems to imply that they're from precise, and Paimon is seen as the Ars Gotia spirit that is most loyal to Lucifer, and Lucifer is kind of like presumed to be the person who is ruling over hell at the time of the Ars Gotia. And now, why am I talking about the Ars Gotia so much? Because Lucifer is actually an individual who was cast out of the heavens. And it makes me wonder, I think there's a lot of symbolism where the traveler is kind of taking on the role of Lucifer, and the Archons are kind of seen as like the 7 princes of hell, the rulers, even though the names do not exactly align. If so, did Paimon also cast themselves out of the heaven to follow us? And what does that mean in terms of who Paimon actually is and how they fit into all of this? Because what we do know now is that the 4 shades are still kind of in the heavens, which means that they are of a different faction. But why, if they are of a different faction, would Asmoday be helping the twins? And maybe she isn't helping. Maybe Asmoday and Isaroth here were trying to pull the traveler away from, or not the traveler, the Abyss Twin, to the traveler, away from Khaenri'ah. Or maybe they were trying to make sure that the Abyss Twin did not fall to the curse of the wilderness or the curse of immortality, and that someone could survive who could later create the Atlas that would serve as the basis for restoring Khaenri'ah. So perhaps those 2 are working to bring the twins together. And either that Asmoday and Isaroth, because you need a space and time, the name of the quest literally implies both of them, you need them to kind of bring 2 people who are 500 years apart, and you need time at the very least to be able to bring Deidre into the past with the key that we give her. But I also want you to remember during this quest that there were 2 spaces kind of laid on top of each other, stacked, if you will. One where Deidre was, where she could see the rift hounds and the monsters, and one where we were and Paimon couldn't. And only by making contact with Deidre and entering her space, could we see the other world? And this, in my opinion, implies heavily Asmodee's involvement in this plan. What is this plan? What is the sibling accomplishing right here? They are creating the Atlas of Khaenri'ah. They are trying to create a Night Kingdom version for Khaenri'ah, and that's the whole reason they were interested in Natlan, the Abyss Twin, because they want to restore Khaenri'ah. And it seems, think about what Maoika said when they were talking about why she would not use the Gnosis or sacrifice the Lord of the Night, that it would destroy the dreams, the hopes, the memories, the aspirations, take away what is essentially the culture of the people of Natlan. And so what if when Khaenri'ah was destroyed, what if when their ley lines were taken, if their ley lines were, I assume even if Khaenri'ah was the land without the gods, they would still have ley lines that track their memory of the world and put them in Irminsul, because they are not all descenders. So it is never implied that Kaya or Capitano or Piero are not in Irminsul at all. Dainsleif is literally called the Bowkeeper. The Bowkeeper is someone who takes care of the branches of Irminsul. And if you think about this, that is what the Abyss Mages give us when we fight them. And what do we mean by branches of Irminsul? We are talking about the leyline blossoms, the trees we find in domains, the branches we obtain from those very Abyss Mages who are using them for power. And we've kind of always understood that to be talking about Irminsul, but we got this bombshell that the 5 sinners were unable to resist the call of the Abyss. The 5 sinners and Dainsleif, the 6 of them came together to stop the Vinsur king from rocking or fucking up Teyvat. But they were unable to resist the call of the Abyss. So think of this. If you remember in Natlan, I want you to think about when Koichi died and Chaska went all wild child on us. She was struggling to resist the call of the Abyss. Think of that happening, but on a much different scale. Maybe think about Ronova causing that by laying the curse of immortality upon the people of Khaenri'ah. Maybe think about that as a reaction instead of a cause. But take that for a moment. Why would they destroy Khaenri'ah? Why would she be there in the first place? I don't know. But part of me thinks that Ronova and Asmodee might not be as close as Ronova suggests in the trailer. What if the Shades have infighting? And I think it would be super, super fun of them to have. Ronova has kind of to this point shifted the narrative that Asmodee is responsible for Khaenri'ah and that she was there laying a curse. Our Genshin and Hoyoverse have shifted that to be the narrative, and we're kind of having a reversal of what we understood to be the truth. But that makes me think that whatever these sinners divvied up, that power of the Abyss, which is one that can destroy the world, that is something that was a big hit to the heavenly principles. Because I wonder if, as Ronova did not dispose of Asmodee herself to weaken Isaroth and Asmodee's power, which at this point, if they are working together, if they are bringing the twins through space and time to Khaenri'ah, if they are creating a sacred Sakura, they are creating a sacred Sakura in Inazuma. And let's think about what the sacred Sakura really is. The sacred Sakura wasn't just a tree. It stabilized Inazuma's ley lines, similar to the Night Kingdom in Natlan. And why would Isaroth help stabilize those ley lines, except for the fact that Irminsul was planted by the heavenly principles? That is my theory, at least. And it is against her interest for the ley lines and the memory of the world to be destroyed. That perhaps that memory is somehow holding the world together, or holding us in this bubble, keeping up the fake sky. Thus, implying Isaroth is working in the name of the heavenly principles, and that the Shades had a split in allegiances because Isaroth is planting the sacred Sakura to maintain Irminsul. And Ronova created the Night Kingdom to do the same, did she not? To preserve the ley lines of Natlan. But here we see Death is angry, and Death lays a curse that gets her in trouble. The Lord of the Night told us that Ronova got in trouble with the heavenly principles, if you remember that. Ronova wasn't technically supposed to lay the curse of immortality. She was overstepping her bounds. Why would she do that? Why would she need to do that? To break her own laws, or to put her in a position where in merely 500 years, which is not very long in the life of a shade, a Khaenri'ah could come back and negotiate and force you to allow his way because you've created a paradox which you cannot allow. So you have to break one of your rules. That curse weakened Ronova, whether she'll ever admit it or not. And we know that Nibirius was also weakened because Nibirius was eaten by one of the sinners that took power of the abyss to destroy the world, that did the very thing the heavenly principles probably wants the least. That person is now one of the shades of the heavenly principles, which further to me implies that that person is gone. We have no idea where they are, if they're coming back. The heavenly principles may not even be alive. They may be waiting for a reincarnation. That reincarnation may be Paimon. There's so many things that it could be, in that explain why the girls are fighting in her absence. But what we do know is that they're supposed to maintain this world, and they're not doing a good job, unlike what we believed prior. And unlike kind of what the situations with the nails suggest, Khaenri'ah really did cost the heavenly principles. This was not a smiting, this was a war, and both sides walked away with casualties, which is not something we have been aware of up to this point. And I want to take a moment to circle back to something I said about Rhineland. I actually think that Rhineland perhaps didn't mean to create all those monsters that invaded the Archons. I think that her and Nibirius were fusing because who laid the curse of the wilderness? Ronova only takes that she laid the curse of immortality. The curse of the wilderness is what turned all half-blooded Khaenri'ahs and all non-Khaenri'ahs who were in Khaenri'ah at the time into Hilly. The curse of immortality is what prevents the people of Khaenri'ah from dying. And so in that, who laid that? What if that was laid by Rhineland and Nibirius together because they were trying to fuse the light with the abyss to ensure the survival of Khaenri'ahs as they fell? What if Hilly Charles, becoming Hilly Charles, was something Rhine herself did to preserve the people of Khaenri'ah in their immortality so they would not rot like Dainsleif and Capitano or go insane like other Khaenri'ahs? Maybe there's a genetic difference that also accounts for this, kind of like with the Oceanids. It could go either way, but part of me believes that this was an accident. Rhine didn't mean to create thousands of monsters. It just kind of maybe was the product of their fusion. Like, think about atomic energy and things like that. That was the byproduct, was all these abyssal kind of life forms bursting out of them, and those kind of flooded the nations as Khaenri'ah fell into the abyss. And that power is what allowed them to place the curse of the wilderness. And if you remember, it kind of reminds me what Egeria did with the Oceanids, causing an entire people to change their form. And for that, if you remember, Egeria caught the attention of the Shades and got in quite a bit of trouble. And the prophecy was literally the entire point of the Fontaine Archon quest. And I want you to think more about the Archon quest and what they've been saying. But we're going to pause here to take a look at fate and what that means, because these kind of circle together and I want to tackle them together. So, when the Lord of the Night in the Natlan Archon quest was talking to Shallonen and Sealali, she said, fate indicates what will happen in the future. The time, manner, and place are all predetermined, but death is different. Death is a rule. And so fate, we understand, is connected to Irminsul directly as the memory of the world. In Fontaine, Nicole has told us a phrase I cannot forget: the history of the future. They are protecting, they being the Shades, the fate of the world by enforcing both the histories and the futures, the fates, the predetermined time, manner, and place of the world as recorded. And remember what Nahida says: the prophecy was carved into Irminsul long ago. I want to know what you mean by carved, girl. Is someone like literally sitting there chiseling these in? That kind of reminds me of the process of creating an ancient name, doesn't it? Like, do you have to create physical manifestations of memory to have them recorded? And we think about the way, or not Inazuma, Irminsul is a computer. And what did Rukkhadevata create? That we never actually like kind of understood why Rukkhadevata thought that was necessary. She created the Akasha system, which was to put all the knowledge of the people in Sumeru in one place, which if you think about it, if something happened to the ley lines of Sumeru, could the Akasha system serve as a backup in the same way the Sacred Sakura might die? What are storybooks in Mondstadt really serving? What purpose? And the Endymion, what was that made of? The thing that powered the Oratrice, the thing that was able to fool the heavenly principles themselves, and the only thing that has ever been able to destroy what we call the seat of Archon. The Endymion was powered with the hopes and dreams of Fontaine. Those beliefs in justice over watching many, many, many trials. In Inazuma, we defend against Raiden with the hopes and dreams and aspirations of the visions that have been taken and put into the wings of guess who? Ronova, someone who seems to take aspirations if you think about her curse. And what powers Mavuika to punch the sky and to break a hole in the firmament and see outside the false sky? Well, it's the belief that no one fights alone. It's the power of ancient names passed from hero to hero, generation to generation, all for the sacrifice and believing in Natlan, and brought together all at once, along with the memories of those times and the memory of Natlan, the will of the people, a song that's been sung for hundreds of years. She uses the hopes and dreams of the people of Natlan. And that is something that's really important because we think about the gacha system in Genshin. I'm going to pull us back. What is the flavor text on Acquaint Fates and Intertwined Fates? Let's look at it. An Acquaint Fate, which is what's used to wish on the standard banner, says, a seed that lights up the night, no matter the distance apart, guided by the stone's glimmer, the fated will meet under the stars. And so this is kind of like something that brings one to the place they need to be under the stars, that brings them to the fated moment, in the right time, in the right place. This is a guide. The flavor text on Intertwined Fate, this is what's used to pull your limited 5 stars. A fateful stone that connects dreams. And remember, dreams are the purview of the Dendro Archon. Its glimmers can entwine fates and connect dreams. So this fate mixes fates together. It takes 2 storylines, 2 things that must happen, that the time, manner, and place are all predetermined, and it connects them to dreams of individual. And then the description finishes just how its glimmer links stars into the shapes of a heart's desire. And so now we have that fate and dreaming are connected, and that the desire of the individual is etched into the stars by the shine of the connection between fate and dreams. So where fate and dreams collide, a constellation lights up in the sky when one's heart's desires reach the stars. And so what do the Khaenri'ahs do? The Khaenri'ahs dream of dreaming because they can no longer connect fate to dreams, and they can no longer desire to reach the stars. Those glimmers of fate do not reach them anymore. And those people only do that, if you remembered what Dainsley said, in the hidden corners of the world where the god's gaze does not fall. The Khaenri'ahs dream of dreaming. They dream of ascending back to the stars, of reconnecting to fate, of being reborn. And is that not what the Abyss Twin is talking about in a space and time for you? Is the Abyss Twin not saying, I want to rebuild the ley lines of Khaenri'ah, essentially? And so what is astromancy? Astromancy is reading a reflection of the heart in the stars and seeing in that their dreams and fate intertwined, how they relate to each other, and how those desires perhaps relate. But Amabi, you say, this is so flawed because we know a Khaenri'ah with a constellation. We know Khaenri'ah, and he's been there since day one. Well, what if I told you it's because Khaenri'ah is from a place where his desires can connect to the stars, where fate can shape him, where he can dream, and thus through the power of dreaming, can reach the stars and can touch fate. It's why the loss of dreaming started the Samsaru and Sumeru, because it was harvesting the power of dreams for knowledge. The academia actually put them all into that samsara to accelerate that process. It's just like Indin which was made from the Fontanians, through the belief in wisdom and the gathering of that general knowledge, that weaving of that ley line back up, if you will, through the belief in justice that goes into protecting from the curse. Because Fontaine can't even get to a ley line system. I'm sure they would love to create one, but Fontaine has bigger problems because they have already drawn a curse upon themselves by engaging in creating something that is against the laws of Teyvat. And if you notice, the punishment for this is to revert it. That what essentially has to happen is Egeria's creations must turn back into Oceanids. They can't maintain humanity there. But the power of all that Indin that was able to turn them from Oceanids into real humans, which accomplishes the same thing that they needed to accomplish, that the people of Fontaine all dissolve into the waters. It does not say they can't be reborn as real humans through the power of their hopes and beliefs that have been sustained for 500 years, and through the energy that's released through the death of their god. And what is the only thing in Genshin Impact that can kill a god at this moment? Faith. Well, the Raiden Shogun /J, another god, so one other god, or the hopes and dreams of people, which is successful in killing Focalors and separating her human consciousness, Farina. And that is how Farina survives. She also dissolves into the waters. She also is a human version of Oceanid, Focalors. You wouldn't say the two that Oceanids that dissolved in the water for all the world. Melusa and Silva as Oceanids were still Melusa and Silva. And so when Focalors is destroyed, when she dies, and her form is also changed from Oceanid into human, and those godly memories and that godly power are given up as fuel for this transformation, along with the power of all that Indimidium, Venti and Zhongli are kind of trying to return the beliefs and hopes to the people. Zhongli's little thing is nah, I want them to harness it themselves. I want them to protect themselves and believe in themselves. And so if that, and you see this in the Mondstadt Archon quest we just went back to, Venti is only there as an enabler. The people of Mondstadt are fully able to defend and believe in themselves, and they are ready. And this is the Abyss invading. This is horrible. But there's a power when you think about nations like Inazuma and Natlan, where they're, and the whole point of the conflict between Capitano and Malvika was belief in the Archon. Auroron is a great example of, I have my doubts. See, Lolly, her plan has a lot of flaws, and it's going to take a really long time. I don't know. It is different when an Archon is there to protect you and is the person who you believe is the most powerful. Who fights and kills the Harbinger in Inazuma? Raiden. The people are not involved and don't really have to step in there. The people have to step in against her, if anything. But you kind of see here, there's a difference in the way people operate when they believe the Archon is the best and all-powerful thing. And I think this is really, really interesting when you look at in-between approaches, which would be Farina's approach to justice, kind of being there, but allowing an impartial party to do it, but engaging in a spectacle and keeping your people's interests. And also Nahida's kind of guardian role over the people through their dreams, even while she herself is not able to live freely. you kind of see the ways the different ideologies of the Archons directly affect the way the people act and the way they may act in terms of engaging with Celestia. And I think, like, even in Liyue, we see this on a much smaller scale when Zhongli lets Hu Tao be the one to go fix the border between life and death. And the people of Liyue are believing in her and lighting the sigils. And do you know what Hu Tao carries on her back? The Staff of Homa, which wings very, very much resemble Ronova. And it is a spear that is very closely linked to this rite, but it makes me wonder if Natlan is not the only place Ronova has been trying to weave other ley lines. And so I can't say for a fact the girls are fighting as in the shades, but I definitely think they're not all acting in concert and everyone has their own agendas. What it really will come down to is who is able to harness the most powerful element in all of Genshin Impact. Only time will tell. Thank you so much. Till next time.